too. I'm going to stand over. I'm not going to stand behind the podium. Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? First of all, welcome to sunny Philadelphia. I'm Kathy Carter, and I appreciate everybody coming out this morning. I think that a lot of people are still coming into town, and I picked the first spot, which I also have heard a lot of times that the mornings are a little difficult at this convention. And I have been many years, and I know that as the evening progresses, people get a lot more engaged. But I appreciate for everyone that has come. I'm looking forward to spending the next hour. Alexi's going to come up in a few minutes, but I thought I'd spend just the beginning to first of all say thank you to those of you who are working within the field, working on the fields that are applying your trade either in coaching, and I see my former coach, John Daly, over here. Shout out to JD. We'll talk about that as I talk about my journey to get to this stage today. So let me start by giving you a little bit of background about me. I have been in this game my entire life. I started, and many of you have read this, but I just want to make sure I level set a little bit of what you're hearing about me and what you're hearing about my vision for the future of our game. I started at 7. I came through the ranks in Virginia, where I grew up, playing all of the various ranges through the ODP program. I grew up really in the 70s and in the 80s, and so the game was quite different then than where we are today. I played ODP, I played on the regional teams, I played in Youth National, I was a high school All-American, and then I was recruited by JD to go to the College of William & Mary, where I played for 4 years, started for the last 2. What you don't know is that I am physically imposing, so I was a goalkeeper, which struck fear in the hearts of everyone that was an opposing team, because obviously the first thing they thought is, I can beat her high. But I had the ability to jump, and I was a bit fearless, which is a good trait, I think, as I stand in front of you today. I transitioned. I graduated from William & Mary in 1991. And at that time, if you think back to that period of time, our women had just gone over to China to take the victory at what wasn't even called a World Cup at that point. It was called a World Championship. There weren't a lot of opportunities in the game for women. And so actually through the game, I decided that I could play recreationally and I could continue my career, but most importantly, I had to get a job. And I did that first by going into work for Booz Allen and Hamilton. And then I transitioned in 1993 to the World Cup Organizing Committee. Ironically enough, those first 2 jobs I got because of people I knew playing soccer. People I had grown up with who were actually employed at those different institutions, and they helped me get entrees into both of those organizations. But starting in 1993, with the World Cup Organizing Committee, I like to say that my journey in the sport of soccer as a business professional began. I continued on with the World Cup until we obviously had the event. Most successful, continues to be the most successful World Cup in the history of the event on the men's side. Of course, we'll talk about 1999, which is the bar that we all intend to leap over at some point in terms of success of an event with the 1999 FIFA Women's World Cup. After the World Cup, there was a small group of people who had an audacious idea, which was to begin the Men's Professional League. And I was a part of that launch team, the launch team for Major League Soccer. I continued with MLS. I left the organization in 1999 and did a variety of different things. I actually took a turn in tennis, which was quite a different sport. And I learned very quickly that I actually like team sports rather than I like individual sports. Not from a participatory standpoint, because I still like to play tennis, but I liked the business of our game. I liked the win-win attitude, the collective spirit, whereas in tennis I found it was a different type because they were reared in some respects to be I win and you lose. And that was something that was a great learning experience for me, was that I actually prefer the collaboration of a team. So I transitioned and made my way back. In 2003, I came back to the league, Major League Soccer, and its marketing company, Soccer United Marketing, which I then took over as the president about 7 years ago. Over the years, I've often been involved with U.S. Soccer, and certainly for the last decade, I have been a part of the team that has represented the U.S. Soccer Federation for its marketing rights. And over that time, I've seen a lot of the opportunity and a lot of the things that I, in some respects, felt we could continue to evolve and potentially look to the future to do even better. So as I like to call it, I look at Trinidad, the idea of Trinidad as the now rallying cry for all of us. And actually it was at that point, I think, that we all started looking at the conversations that we may have been having in the back rooms came out into the forefront of our conversation. And it was through that discussion with my family and my friends that I decided I could no longer sit in the boardroom and have ideas and have opinions. I needed to become a part of the conversation. And so I announced to come out in front of you all my candidacy for president of the U.S. Soccer Federation. So why is it that I think I am prepared, number one, and why is it I think I am the right person to lead our federation as we go forward? Yes, I have a history in the game, but it's more about the experience that I have actually generated over the last 25 years that gives me the ability to bring together all of the membership around a common and shared vision. Excuse me, we often talk about soccer becoming the preeminent sport in this country, but what's interesting is as I've talked to all of you, there are a lot of ideas about how and what we do to bring that to the forefront and actually make this, and actually deliver against that objective. But what I have heard from you is that you want to be a part of the conversation. And so I have been through that process. I have helped bring a disparate organization together around a shared and common vision and driven that forward and seen how that actually has to operate and how ultimately together we can be more successful than we can be individually. I have, therefore, the leadership qualities that will listen, will be the person to bring us together so that you have a voice within the Federation, but more importantly, an advocate about what we need to do in the youth soccer space and in the grassroots in totality. So as I like to say, when I think about this, I have the vision for change, I have the leadership and the experience to make that change become a reality. And that is something that I think as members we need to think very seriously about. Not just who's got great ideas, but who can actually lead us and who can actually be a part of bringing the dialogue to the forefront so you all have a voice in what we need to do as a federation as we go forward. So this morning I actually laid out for you and sent an email and talked about the first part of that plan, which is establishing an independent commission. The reason that I have suggested this is that when I think about all the great ideas that are out there in our country, it's challenging to bring them all together because ultimately we've got time zones, we've got weather, we've got space, we've got no space. And our country is so dynamic and so diverse. So I have looked at how do we bring everybody into the conversation. And part of that is I think we need some an independent look at that. We've seen this, and we've seen this be successful in a couple of different spaces throughout history. Twice the USOC has established independent commissions when they have not performed to give them sort of a fresh look at what the future should actually hold. And they came out of that, and the results of those commissions were great recommendations that were born from the membership and from the athletes, but ultimately drove future ideas that were out there, but perhaps were not percolating to the fore. The second thing that we saw is actually in 1984 when the men's basketball team in the Olympic Games did not win the gold medal. And it was the first time since the NBA had actually, the players had been a part of the process that they hadn't won. And they too then established a very significant commission to look at what was happening, the result of which was for them to bring Jerry Colangelo in and to really evolve USA Basketball, and specifically in that case, the men's basketball program. This, from my standpoint, is intended to really look at three key things. How do we succeed? And I define success not just in wins and losses, but in the quality of the experience that our kids and our families have within the confines of our game. How is it that we empower you to continue the work that you do on a local level to bring people into the game? And what do we do to make sure that we take a strong and hard look at everything that we're doing and bring these great ideas and recommendations to the forefront so we continue to evolve what's happening in our game? And then finally, I think it goes so far as to look at what are we doing in our referee programs? What are we doing in our coaches programs? Because those are things that actually empower the game at really the most important level. So I'm asking this commission to actually come together. I've asked Casey Wasserman, who just brought the LA Olympic Games, is the chairman of LA 2028, and also of the Paralympic Games, to chair this commission. We will bring in thought leaders, both within our game, but thought leaders outside of our game. It's through that lens that I believe that we can truly have the dialogue, but as a part of that, there will be opportunities for everyone to be a part of the conversation. And I want this, you're going to hear this time and time again, not just here, but in other times if I meet with you individually. I believe that you are a part of the answer, and I don't think that we have given you enough of an opportunity to be a part of the dialogue. And that is the key component of this. But we must have some independent view of how best to bring it all together in an effort that we can move forward. And as I've gone out and spoken with many of you, what I have found is that there is a great desire for us to evolve. And that, for me, is very encouraging. I've been incredibly encouraged by the conversations I've had with each and every one of you. So I believe that this will give us the best chance to bring us together and then align as a group behind common shared vision and a plan for us to be able to achieve that. Finally, and what I will ultimately lay out over the next week, but I don't want to get it all too quickly, is what I intend to do around my third pillar. If the first pillar for me is about vision, about change, the second pillar is about using an independent commission to really to take a hard look at what we're doing. The third for me is about diversity. Now, I will tackle that first as it relates to the women's game, which I believe that we have been incredibly successful. But I think we need to do more. I think we as a federation need to look at that and help continue the evolution and lead by example what's happening not just here in our country, but what's happening in the world. Because I think that through diversity, through equality, and through opportunity, we can lead change, not just here in our country, but across the entire world. And I think that is something that our women's team has done very well, and I think we need to help. We need to give them more wind behind their sails. We need to make sure that there are people that wake up every day and go to bed at night worrying about the success of our women's program, who have taken us to heights that I think we've only barely scratched the surface on. And for me, that is a key component of our future. So with that, I'm going to ask Alexi to come up because I've only, like I said, scratched the surface. And I think the intention, Alexi, if I'm not mistaken, is you're going to ask me some questions, but we're also going to give the audience, if they have some questions as well.
Yes, we're going to ask a few questions.
Excellent.
And then let them have it.
Great.
Okay. I have so many questions. So many questions. But I was watching this, and I just found out about this this last night. And full disclosure, I am represented by WMG, which the W stands for Wasserman. I know Casey. But my first question with regards to this, and let's just go to this immediately,
sure.
is if you agree that the business of U.S. soccer is doing well, and that we may or may not have a soccer problem, why are you putting it in the hands of somebody? I love him, but who knows little to nothing about soccer?
Well, that's actually the point. The point is that we need people who actually understand how to run a process, not who have the ideas and actually have the solutions, because I think the solutions actually exist out here. I think you have them. But for me, it's actually about how do we pull that out of the membership? And I think there are so many times, and I've heard it over the last 45 days. I mean, there is no shortage of ideas, but the challenge that we have had is how do we process all of that and actually put it into a format of recommendations that our board and our membership can actually then approve and move forward on. Casey actually has what I believe, and it's not about Casey, it's just he has great access to independent thought and other resources that I think we need to bring to this. So for me, it wasn't about Casey's involvement in our game, it was actually about his diplomacy and what he had just achieved with the Olympic Games, which was convincing in a period of time where maybe we may not be the most popular, that coming to Los Angeles in 2028 was a great idea for the Olympics. So I think that, for me, was a reason why Casey was a great person, but it also has to do with his access.
But there will be soccer people involved.
Of course there will
be.
Of course there will be. I mean, and quite frankly, it's intended to draw out of all of us the most important parts of our game. Because again, if we are only ruling ourselves, so to speak, I think that we will not always see the things that are so close to us. So the idea is to bring independent thought to this so that perhaps they show us some of the things that we all know,
but perhaps we're not listening to each other. And I mean that from the federation perspective, and I mean it across the different regions. Ultimately, this is about helping us bring to the forefront that which we already know.
What's a soccer person, by the way? We should probably define that, because we throw it around there a lot.
Sure. For me, it's actually people who have been in the game, who would make their living in the game. So it'll be everybody from whether it's John Daly or Anson Dorrance, who have been a part of, let's say, women's soccer from a development side. It'll be administrators and people that are part of the states. Part of that will be done through the overall conversations out in the markets, but I also believe that we need to bring in consulting work where we actually get detailed into the data and look at that. So whether it's a Boston Consulting Group or a Deloitte or a McKinsey to help us actually understand and unpack some of the things that are happening. You know, I've talked to a lot of you guys about the economics of youth soccer in particular, and I haven't necessarily been able to get a good grasp yet of how big it is. But what I have and what I do know is that roughly 95% of all of revenue that goes into youth soccer comes from families and parents. So are there other ideas for us to diversify that so we can bring more resources into the game? And I think everything's on the table from my perspective, but I think that it's about bringing thought leaders. There was a great article I read about the birth age, about and what's recently happened, and talking about, which, by the way, draws back to the tipping point, what Malcolm Gladwell wrote about. Well, why don't we have him as a part of the commission? Well, that might be a part of what this is. So it's in its formative stages, but I think it's about us bringing great resources across our country to bear on our federation, and more importantly, on our sport.
All right. Soccer United Marketing. It is a part of at this point, your present and past.
Yep.
A lot is made of what it is and what it isn't. First things first. Why did Soccer United Marketing, in your mind, come about?
Well, it started because in 2002, actually just slightly before that, but in 2002, the World Cup was going to be on television in the middle of the night. If you remember, Japan, Korea, it was going to be right in the middle of the night. Univision was going to broadcast in Spanish language, and there was no English language broadcaster that wanted to broadcast the event. They said nobody will get up in the middle of the night. And the owners of Major League Soccer got together and said, that's not great for our game. And so we must create a mechanism to go and make sure that our fans can see this in both English and Spanish. And so they bought the rights. And what they looked at was the fact that there was not much development that was happening. And in fact, what was going on was the revenues in our sport in 2002 were very, very low. And that inhibited investment in the game and development. And so they realized that if we created a company that actually became the center point of the commercial marketplace, that what would happen is we felt that the rising tide could lift all boats. And through that, we would actually see exponential opportunity for all parts of soccer to get more revenue that could be reinvested into the development of the game. And by the way, that's proven to be absolutely true.
In that it's been very successful?
It's
made a lot of money?
Well, the sport has actually generated a lot of revenue. And so the operations of Soccer United Marketing are intended not to make a lot of money, but to create a lot of money. Now, that's for the U.S. Soccer Federation, that's for CONCACAF, that's for the Mexican Federation, and that's for Major League Soccer. But the idea was that as a result of the creation of this company, the federation, just as an example, would have more money. And that has proven to be correct.
You have taken a leave of absence from your position at SUM. If you are elected, are going to be giving up what is presumably a very nice paycheck going forward. Do you see any conflict of interest when it comes to the way that SUM is in relationship to the United States Soccer Federation?
You know, this is obviously a question that has been asked quite frequently. What I haven't been able to really understand is why people think it's a conflict of interest, so let me tell you the way I've looked at it. First of all, I don't think it is, because I obviously will not be employed by Soccer United Marketing. I think it's incumbent upon us to, A, recognize that the operating staff within the Federation, so Dan Flynn and his staff, will and should manage the partnership with SUM. And it is their responsibility to make sure that it operates correctly and ultimately to go through a future state, go through a bidding process both for SUM and other parties to bid for those rights. The role of the president isn't to be a part of that. The role of the president is to make sure that there is an open, transparent, and ultimately independent group of the board that then reviews the contracts. And so from my own perspective, I look at it, and I won't be a part of how that process runs. I'll be a part of the group and ultimately with independent directors that says this is a good contract and that we went through the appropriate process to get to that contract. So I don't see it as a conflict of interest because ultimately my main objective will be to make sure that the Federation is getting its appropriate amounts of money.
But you can respect the fact that when you have principals, whether it's Don Garber, whether it's now possibly yourself, on both sides at different times, that's why the conflict of interest discussion comes up.
Well, I mean, everyone on the board, quite frankly, represents a membership, a part of the constituency of our game. And so there are routine moments where people have to be recused in certain conversations. We see that when we start talking about youth development, or we start talking about changes in the youth organization, and those that are on the board must be recused from that conversation because they come from that. So the very nature of our board actually is a representation of its membership, and as a result of which people will have to come in or have to come out of those conversations. So from my own perspective, I look at it, and as long as you've got the right part of governance in place, which I believe both we do, but I'm also an advocate of continuing to make sure that we routinely review and make sure that we've got all the right mechanisms in place to make sure that it is open, transparent, and most importantly, communicated appropriately. And I think that's, as I've talked to a lot of people, I think that's part of the issue, is that people, they don't understand the contract. And very simply, the Federation is protected on any downside risk because there's a guarantee in place. So in fact, in 2000, when we just failed to qualify for Russia, the Federation still makes the same amount of money. The upside is there that if there are overages to the baseline minimum, then there's a split and a share. But there's 50 people today at Soccer United Marketing that wake up every day and they think about the U.S. Soccer Federation. So conversely, if the Federation needed to do that, they'd have to hire and take the risk. And what it does is it allows us to drive and make sure that the Federation can develop programming that's important for the grassroots and develop programming that supports our national teams. And I think that's the key thing that I look at is the existence of some with the U.S. Soccer Federation is consistent. 90% of all the Power 5 conferences in college sports actually outsource all of their rights to an independent marketing agency because it gives them the ability to manage their business. And that's the same thing that the Federation has done. We'll make sure, and I believe that they already exist, that the appropriate mechanisms are in place to make sure that it is a fair, open, and transparent process, which, by the way, it has been. But we will do that and communicate that more effectively to you, the members, so that if there are questions, you don't feel like there are no answers. So that's the way I look at it.
Well, I mean, if not to speak for anybody out there, but one of those questions would be you want it fair, open, and transparent. When it comes to the contract is up when?
2022.
2022. Is it an open bid process then?
Yeah, from my perspective, but my point of view is that Dan should build that process with input from the attorneys and from the board. It's not for me to dictate that. Because you're not electing someone to do that. You're electing someone that can manage and lead this organization. That is a responsibility of the people that we have hired to run the Federation. But yes, would be my recommendation. And I believe that I am in a unique position to be a thought leader and a thought partner, if you will, for our CEO. But it's the CEO's responsibility. But I will certainly be in a place where I can poke holes in the process that's been put together to make sure that it is fair and transparent.
Are you in favor of unbundling the MLS and national team?
I am in favor of what will drive the most revenue into our sport, period, full stop. And so for me, it's not about should they be together or should they be separate. I believe wholeheartedly we need, and this is the thing that's interesting, I believe that our sport is our business and our business is our sport. I don't believe that they are separate. And so the idea of that we can just manage our business without an idea about how that affects the business, to me, we must continue to bring more resources into our game. We do that through bringing more economic viability to the Federation. So I am an advocate of how we get the most value for our Federation, period, full stop.
Last question about some. Notwithstanding the paycheck that you have pulled from some, do you have no equity or financial interest other than what has been paid to you before?
That is correct.
That is correct going forward. All right, let's move on to some other things here. What do you think the biggest misconception is about you? And this might apply to some or not.
Well, I've heard a lot of things. I've heard that FIFA won't deal with me. I've heard
Because
that...
what?
Because I'm a girl.
You're a girl?
You know, it's surprising, isn't it? And that how could anybody in the international football community take me seriously? Which I think is really rather funny, because ultimately I've spent the last 15 years gaining the respect and the trust of the Mexican Federation, of members of CONMEBOL, working within the hallways of FIFA. But if that's what people want to say, good on you. I've heard it before. I'll hear it again. I have succeeded in what I've done because I'm tough and fair, but I've gained and earned the respect of the international football community. So that's been certainly one thing. And then, of course, the idea that I'm not interested in the grassroots. And will I actually be an advocate on behalf of the grassroots? And that, to me, has been a little bit surprising, because while I haven't been there for the last period of time...
Where do you think it stems from, though?
Because I've been working in the pro game. I think it's because where have you been? And my point of view is our game starts with you. Every kid that comes in, they don't become a professional out of the womb. You start with them. They come into your programs. They start their journey in our sport, as do their parents. Many of you are their parents. They start with you. And so if we are not focused on your success, then the top of our pyramid cannot be successful either. And I think that's one of the things, whether or not I will actually advocate on behalf of the grassroots. And that's been what's been fascinating about the last 45 days for me, is there's a thirst out there for the membership to be included, and I look forward to being their advocate.
As you mentioned, you are a woman, right?
I know that because he had to put the lavalier on my bra.
I did, exactly. But part of your, at least your public platform, and the way that you've gone about it, I think it's strategic, and I'm fascinated by how all the candidates are going about their campaign. Yeah. Part of it is, as you've talked very openly and publicly about the fact that you are a woman and how the advantages that you have and how it can translate to young girls and stuff like that. How did that come about in terms of you deciding this is how I'm going to go about my campaign? Because you could have said, look, I'm not even going to touch it, I'm not even going to deal with it, but you decided to do that.
You know, I was reading an article the other day, the CEO of OpenTable, and we happen to know her. But she was a Wall Street analyst, and she said the way that she succeeded on Wall Street was by pretending she was one of the guys, or that she was a guy, until she got pregnant, and she had to come out as a woman. And you know, and then she said when she did that, she realized her full self. And for me, I look at it, and for 25 years, I've been battling on the inside. I've been battling for equality. I've been battling for diversity. I've been battling for equal pay. I've been battling the internal politics. I've been a part of helping young women and young girls continue and start and continue their career. But I think for the first time, I said I can't just do that in behind the scenes. It's time for me to step out and lead in a way that I believe I've trained my entire life for, to lead our federation. And by the way, imagine if I can change the conversation. If I can be a part of that, to me, that's a gift.
You mentioned equality, and obviously a lot of the things that we're talking about now when it comes to the federation is the United States men's national team and the United States women's national team. Just general thoughts about what exists, why it exists, and what you would do to change it in terms of that equity or that equality.
Well, for me, let me start first and foremost. Equal pay for me is table stakes. And so we're all talking about it, and that's a bit of a soundbite, in my opinion. Of course, I believe in equal pay. But for me, it doesn't stop there. And actually, when I think about our women's program, I think about the fact that if I ask people out there who wakes up every day and worries about it, it's hard to answer that question. And so for me, it's about we must put more resources behind how we evolve our women's game. And what do we do to make sure that we've got the right resources, and those resources are equal to our men's game. It continues on with the NWSL. And what do we do to make sure, as and the draft is about ready to start taking place, what do we do to make sure that the NWSL is around in 50 years? Because we made great progress. So it's having both the desire, because that's just a part of who I am, is to make sure that we are focused on bringing our women's game and giving them the resources for them to continue to do what they've done on the field of play. And I think we've got to get behind them even more. Look, we've done great things.
Why should it be equal?
Why should it be equal? Well, first of all, because I think our women are, I could say it the other way around, our women have been the best in the world. And we have defined a sport, both from a domestic but an international level. And I believe that we have a responsibility, and by the way, an opportunity to use that for 50% of our membership base. 50%, roughly 50% of our members and players are girls. And so why in the heck wouldn't we want to make sure that they see that they can be the next executive, the next coach, the next national team member, or by the way, the next doctor? And that's something, we've got such a unique opportunity. I think it's, again, I look at it as not just an obligation, but it's actually a gift. We can, with this sport, change the dialogue that otherwise is just words. And we can show it. We can walk the walk. And we can do that. And I think that that is a great opportunity for us.
Would that apply to Paralympic or beach or futsal team?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I mean, right now I'd say, and I've talked about this, there's a lot for us to do. But yes, I mean, I think it does, as we look at the Paralympic team, as we look at the beach team, I think we've got to figure out how we continue to provide them with the support that they need for them to continue. And for all people that wake up every day and put on the national team jersey, it has a crest, and they stand there when the national anthem is being played. I think we owe them, we have an obligation to give them the resources and the support that they need to succeed on behalf of our country.
So I want to make sure it's clear. If you wake up, whether you're a man or a woman, and you represent the United States, and you put on that jersey, and you're traveling and you're playing and all that kind of stuff, regardless if it's a men's national team, a women's national team, futsal, beach, or Paralympic, you should be treated equally. I
believe that you should be treated. And by the way, that's a good question. And I think as we think about the Paralympics and the beach, I'm not sure that we're yet at a point where they won't treat it equally in terms of the support we give the teams.
What about pay?
Pay? Well, I don't think we can pay the Paralympic athletes exactly the same because we haven't gone through all the process. So for me, I look at it to start with, and this is the discussion I've had with the Paralympians and I've had with beach. There's not a full-time coach with beach. There's not a full-time paid coach with beach. And so I think we've got some work to do with those athletes to determine
But that's not their fault. Why should they be punished in terms of pay
with that, but that's
relative to anybody else? Just because they're not
I agree with you. I agree with you. But for me, I look at it as we must evolve those programs. And if we are going to have the program, we must continue to give them resources. So we should have a full-time coach with beach because that's going to help us compete. With the Paralympians, they need to be paid. And I think we've got to continue to work towards what we define as success. For me, clearly the women is one where I believe that the quality of our national teams, and not to say that the Paralympians don't have the quality, but rather where we are in the women's game, we have an opportunity to change the conversation globally.
All right, I'll let it go on that one. Okay, you've said that the soccer landscape out there is confusing, especially when it comes to youth. And I know you've talked about that's where you want to focus, that's where you want to start. How have we gotten here? Why is it so confusing?
Well, I don't know, but it is fractured and it is confusing. I think it's because, you know, when I grew up, and probably the same with you, Alexi, and many of you, we all had volunteer coaches. And it was my dad. He wore baseball cleats and had a book. Yep. And that's how it all started. And somehow that worked. But I think where we are today, and there's 12,000 coaches here, which is the largest convention that we've had, there are a ton of people that make a living at this game. And so we've evolved from a volunteer base to much more of a paid model, where we've got coaches and administrators. I see that even in the state associations, where so many have now volunteer boards, but they have full-time staff. Well, that didn't exist when we were first starting in the game.
That's a good thing, though, right?
I think it's a good thing. I absolutely think this is positive.
People that make money in soccer seem to be vilified right now, whether it's coaches and everything. But it's good to be making a living in soccer, right?
By the way, because it gives...
a good living.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a strong advocate. Right. I like the fact that we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people that call this their full-time profession, and that wasn't the way it was before. But I think what we've got to do is continue to create opportunities for kids and more clarity around the youth system. And that's actually why I've suggested the Independent Commission. Because ultimately, what I think an unintended consequence of the way that we've developed our youth system, and I believe it is unintended, I don't think anybody woke up and said, I'm going to make it so that it's terribly confusing, is that we're leaving kids out. So we've created, through the differentiation between the DA and US Club and ODP, a system where we have created exclusivity as opposed to inclusiveness. And I think, by the way, as a result of that, there's a lot of unaffiliated programs that come in, certainly on the boys' side, maybe not as many on the girls' side. And I think as a result of which, the void is being filled from an economic perspective. There are tons and tons of kids that are playing. So what do we do to bring those kids back in the fold? And what do we do to bring the system and make it more clear? Because I think that allows a family to determine where best to put their hard-earned money for their kid. But I think, as I think about unintended consequences, we were speaking about it earlier. I was talking to Mike, and he was saying, you know, we've got kids that may not have economic resources, but also don't see the coaches that they can relate to in the inner city. And as a result of which, we are excluding them out of the process. And it was unintentional, I believe. But as a result of which, that's happening in inner cities. And it's happening in where we see the unaffiliated ethnic leagues that are playing. And we've got to figure out how we make them a part of the system and give them the resources that they too can thrive and really build whatever their outcome is. If that is to be a professional, if that's just to be a part of the game and get a college scholarship, that's fantastic. That means a kid that may not have otherwise had an opportunity to go to school is going to go to school. And that's a benefit from our game. But I think as a result of which people are chasing that and they don't exactly know where to put their hard-earned money.
Sunil Gulati, current president and outgoing president, he was here earlier. What has he done well?
Well, gosh, I got to tell you, I think our game is I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation, to a large part, is credit to what Sunil and Dan and the rest of the board has done. So I don't think the world's fallen apart for us. I just think we've got to take an opportunity to evolve. So I think Sunil has done a tremendous job of bringing our game forward. But I think there's a reason why I am an advocate of term limits, because ultimately I think change is good. And I think new ideas and fresh ideas are very healthy. And actually, while this has been somewhat a painful process for you guys, and probably for the candidates as well, I think this dialogue is terrific. And having those that have run unopposed, and Sunil in particular, it might have made it so we didn't have to have this type of conversation. And I think this conversation is incredibly important because I believe all of the membership deserves a voice.
What has he done poorly?
You know, that's for I mean, I think that's for everybody else to decide. I think that...
no, you can decide it. I'm asking you. You can decide.
Yeah, no,
right?
Listen, I mean, I think we can all look at it. I think I think that he didn't give the green light, or the board didn't give the green light to putting more of the technical resources in place. And I think that as a result of which we had an elected official who perhaps had too much responsibility on the game and to make decisions around or have the influence around coaching and managerial decisions that I think should be a shared responsibility, but ultimately should be the responsibility of a general manager. I think the president will have a part of the role, but shouldn't be the deciding factor in that.
So, as it relates to both teams, but certainly a U.S. men's national team that doesn't have a coach right now, you are an advocate for having one general manager in charge of all the national teams, or one general manager in charge of the women's national team, the men's national team, or? Well,
what I'd say is we need a women's department. First and foremost. And so what I want to work with Dan Flynn on, the mechanisms of that, whether it's a single person that oversees everything, or we have it as two different divisions that report into Dan. I think that part needs to be defined, but there must be full-time people. And I actually think the same thing about Paralympians and about beach and all of our national teams. We need people that wake up every day worrying about those parts of the game. So the exact titles we'll figure out, but I believe that we must have people that wake up. And today, that's a little bit unclear to me about who is it that actually manages the Paralympians, as an example. And not coaches, not about coaches. This is about, and we see this in sports across our country, and actually around the world. You have general management around the game. And that doesn't mean they're the sporting directors or the technical directors or even the coaches. It's those that look at the health of the sport, about the boys and the men, or about the Paralympians, about beach, about the women. And today, that doesn't exist. And I think that's one of the things we really must. And we do it as it relates to, are the teams showing up on time and are they doing those? But actually has the broad purview about how do we make sure that we're having dialogue and not dictating out of Chicago.
I know you don't want to dictate and you want to get consensus and all that, but you certainly have opinions. You've talked about the fact that you are a soccer person, both on and off the field. Do you have an opinion as to who should be the men's national team coach?
You know, I actually don't, because I think that we've got to work with our general manager, and ultimately I think we need to have more people who've been involved in the game, who have called the technical side of their game, their life, to be a part of that process. Former athletes, those that have been in the game. What I have a very strong opinion about is that we've got to evolve how everyone is included in the conversation. And so for me, it's not about dictating policy. I will tell you, under my leadership, we will change the way we engage. We will work with the membership. We will bring people with expertise to be a part of the solutions, not just tell them what to do. That is what I feel incredibly strong about. That's where I'm opinionated. Who the national team coach is, I think we've got great people out there who have great ideas, and we're not giving them enough air. We're not giving them the ability to actually create. And I mean that in the technical side of the game. I mean that in the way we build our game for our kids. It's too prescriptive. I think it's the way we've run our business. What I've seen in my experience is if you give really smart people a little bit of space, and certainly in our country, could you imagine if we told the people in Silicon Valley to create Silicon Valley? I don't think we'd have what we have. But you give them the resources, you give them the ability and empower them, and I think there's no end to what we can be.
But you do have to lead at some point.
Absolutely.
And gaining consensus and bringing people together is all fine and well, but nobody's asking you or any of the candidates to have all of the answers, right?
Right.
But you're running for president of U.S. Soccer. You should have a few answers and a few solutions. So give me some specifics as to what you would do in, I don't know, let's say the first 6 months.
Well, say the first 100 days. I think there's 3 things. First, we've got to establish a broader vision for the Federation. And that means not just preeminent sport. It means we must have aspects of that you guys can measure our success and failure on. Today, I've asked many people, and I can't get the same answer twice. And that means that everybody's running different directions. So for me, establish a vision that has measurement that is a part of it. Number 2.
I want to make sure.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Give me an example. It doesn't have to be the example, but just an example of what that would be.
Well, we will work with the staff, we'll work with the board, we'll work with the membership. Not just to say that we want to be the preeminent sport, but how are we going to measure that? And I'll give you a perfect example. Today, I've asked many people out there, is the DA successful? And I get 50 opinions if I ask 50 people. Because when and I, by the way, full disclosure, haven't connected with Chicago to see what their objectives were. But it's clear to me that they didn't sell the idea to the membership in a way that you can hold them accountable. Because I've asked you, and nobody's been able to give me the same answer twice. So there is a real lack today of accountability. And so for me, that's a part of what we must put in place so that you can hold the Federation and your elected officials responsible, and you can hold them to task.
What are some of the answers that they gave you, just of those 50? Give me a
no,
couple.
yes,
no, but
maybe.
What is the responsibility of DA? Give me some of the answers that they told.
Well, by the way, Alexi, that's the point. Every coach out there has a different opinion as to whether or not it's helping us develop better players.
But if they all have different opinions, then at some point you have to mandate and say, this is what we're doing, right?
By the way, to be fair, I've only spoken to 50 people, and so I think there's a lot more that we actually have to bring together. That's the entire intention of having an independent commission, because ultimately, we have to have more conversation and then make decisions. Now, and what I'm saying is, nobody's been able to answer the question yet for me. Is it better for us to invest the $8 to $10 million that we invest in the DA, or is it better to hire 100 scouts? What accomplishes? And so we haven't finished that conversation. But that, to me, is the question: is how do we achieve what we want to achieve and make sure that we are tracking, but have the strength to say, if it doesn't work, let's pivot. And I think today we're so wedded to our ideas being right that we're having a hard time pivoting if they're not right.
We have 15 more minutes, I think, and I think that we're going to ask for some questions out
You bet.
there. You good?
Yeah,
You good with that?
absolutely.
All right. Do we have a microphone out there? There it is. I can see it in the back. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I will continue to ask questions. There's one right there. Name, affiliation, if you are a voter or not.
It doesn't matter. I want everybody's opinion.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Everybody's coming in.
Yeah. Including you, Alexi.
Including me. I don't vote.
Kevin McCullough from SB Nation. I'm wondering if you think there's any conflict of interest with Casey Wasserman heading up the Independent Commission, saying that people that he represents may stand to benefit from his recommendations.
Well, first of all, Casey's not the one that's making the recommendations. Casey's the one that's driving the process. And so, as we've talked about, the idea is that Casey has access. He has tremendous access to thought leaders in our country, thought leaders in sport, and thought leaders across the country and the world. So for me,
of that.
1, 2.
The way I look at it is, we want to bring not just Casey, but we want to bring a lot of different people into the conversation. He's not
1, 2.
personally doing all of the work. He's leading the process for there to be people that come into the fold.
How do you know Casey?
I just know Casey forever. I mean, in business, just like I know the heads of all the networks and all the sporting apparel manufacturers and most of the heads of companies across the world. That's just the role that I've been in, that I have access to a tremendous number of thought leaders in our game and those that are in our sport or in sport and those that are actually outside of that.
I had one more question before we go over the question. Who's your major competitor? Who do you look at and say, that is a formidable opponent right now in terms of the
Well,
campaign?
I guess what I'd say is I have actually looked at more with, I think there's some good ideas out there from a lot of different people. But ultimately, I'm running my own race because I think that I'm going to qualify
1, 2.
across all the different various buckets of what I think we need to lead the Federation. So it'd be my intention to actually bring ideas from all of the candidates. Because I think that's actually where we're going to get the greatest benefit, is if we have support from everyone. And I think those people that are out there, they care about our sport. And so I think we've got to make sure we can continue to keep them in the fold.
We have more questions. You want to get a mic up here so because Kathy's mic is phased out.
Should be on. Should be on.
Yeah.
Why are you going to the business
Should be on.
way instead of the soccer?
Why should we go with a business person as opposed to a soccer person? Well, it's a pretty big organization, pretty dynamic and pretty diverse. And by that I mean the sport is one aspect of the game, the business certainly, and they are together. And so I have not been on the technical side. To be fair, not many of those that are suggesting that they are soccer people have that much more. There certainly are some, but have that much more experience in the game than I do, even on the field. But ultimately, I think it's somebody who has diversity, and not diversity in who I am, but diversity of experience.
Define your diversity.
Of experience?
Before soccer is concerned.
Well, I've been in the game for 40 years.
Now, I'm talking about the business man,
The business side of it?
excuse me, Bridget.
Okay, my diversity in the business is swamped with things that I manage. So before I took a leave of absence, I managed over 100 people.
About 150 people. I also have managed aspects of the business, whether that's media, whether that's sponsorship, whether that's licensing or consumer products. I've managed events and hospitality. I've walked the hallways of the international community, have relationships. So the diversity is the experience that I bring to the table.
Other questions out there? Over there? In the red? Hold on. First in the red and then come back to you.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Who are you? Where are you from?
My name is Jeremy Handler. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm the director of coaching at youth club there
Great.
at ODP and PSL. I assist with the women's college team as well, Hamlin University. So that's kind of a two-part, but I think they're related. So you're talking about how you want change, you want voices heard. Yet the Grant Wall story comes out about you having a dinner with Sunil Gulati, Don Garber, and the heads of the New Jersey and New York Adult State Associations. And in the article, it talks about how Sal endorses you a few hours later when he didn't even know he worked before that, and they did that without the input of their constituents at all. And then also the second part of that is that in that, you champion yourself as kind of the female candidate and the women candidate, but within that article, he did quotes basically referring to you as a girl, saying that you're not just a housewife. I haven't seen those addressed or seen those denounced, and also you were present in some when the U.S. women's national team was fighting for equal pay, and I didn't hear anything from you on that. So I guess I'm curious.
So I think you're asking me, am I woman enough? Have you asked that same question of the other candidates? Have you asked Kyle Martino what he was doing when the women were doing this? Have you asked Carlos Cordero? Right? You can ask me. You can ask me. But by the way, ask everybody the same question. And what happened and what the way Sal addressed me, welcome to my world. Welcome to my world. Any other questions?
Do you want to expound any more on the actual dinner? Do you see it as any type of conflict of interest in terms of?
Well, let's be honest. I was invited to come by a dinner to meet people. I am assuming that happened for other people as well. That's for them to determine. Sunil has introduced me to people. Don has introduced me to people. You have introduced me to people. People in the audience have introduced me to people. That's the way we go about this. I've earned the respect of people after 25 years of being in this business. People are willing to step up and support me, not just within the game, but also outside of the game. And so quite frankly, if somebody wanted me to meet someone and they believe in me, well then I think that's okay. And by the way, I have seen that with other candidates. But ultimately, this is about me. And it's about my vision and my ability to drive change. And drive change with experience to get it done. And by God, I have experiences that I think others may have had, which makes me tough and it makes me strong. But it also, I have empathy. So I don't mind those questions. I mind the tenor because I think we should stay positive. And I think we should look at how we continue to evolve because I think we need a lot of different ideas out there. And we need somebody who's actually gone through those fights, because I got to tell you, I got lots of them that I could share, and I will with those in private, about what I've had to do to get to where I am today.
You had a question? Somebody?
Right here, standing up.
How can the...
Who are you? Where are you from?
Kenneth Newman from Chicago. I've been involved with soccer forever. How can the non-MLS soccer development academy teams and those clubs make sure that they can compete on the financial side with the soccer development teams from the MLS or USL down the line in the future?
Well, I don't know if we need them to compete. Because I think that we need the kids to have more opportunity to come in and out of the system. But my point is, we can't just have families trying to compete with professional teams that have a lot of different revenue streams. And so the question is, how do we not compete, but maybe how do we work together so that kids are at the forefront of the opportunity? And so, because I think today, it shouldn't be about you must play for this club or you play for an MLS club. We should be worrying about the kids and whether or not, as they make choices through their development, do they have opportunity?
But Kathy, let me follow up. With the growth of the game across the country, which I've seen since I was playing youth soccer in the 70s, how can small clubs that is developing talent, whether it's in an inner city or a rural area, in a non-MLS region, make sure that those clubs have the opportunity to compete with the Chicago Fire Juniors or Red Bull or LA or whatever. My point is that there's talent everywhere, and the scouting right now isn't finding some of that talent, not because it's anybody's fault, but because of the growth of the game and the size of the country.
Well, I think I agree with you in terms of the scouts, and I would go further that it may be a problem inside the DA and outside of the DA. So whether or not we need to determine whether or not we can have those that can compete with MLS or USL clubs, I think we should be looking at, are we actually capturing kids that are playing in unaffiliated leagues? Or, should we be making sure that we've got scouts at ODP? I was in Phoenix, whenever it was, for ODP Region 4, and I was watching a young woman play because she liked the experience that she had with ODP and she wanted to play for her high school team. And she is committed to play at UCLA, one of the top programs, and she's not gotten a look by the U.S. national team. She's, I think, 17, so that age group. And so for me, that's the question is, and that's within our system, whether or not we're finding that talent. Now look at outside of the system. And so I think those are the things I think we've got to figure out how we actually go from being exclusive to inclusive. So I don't know that it's about the Chicago Fire versus the Chicago Magic or the Green Whites or the different teams that exist in Chicago. For me, it's about how do we find the kids that actually are not at all a part of the system. So that's the issue right there. And I think as I've talked to each and every one of you, Terry's sitting here, he's got a very specific point of view that I think has some great value. but it may not be as applicable. It might be applicable in Washington. It may not work. And I think we're going to test out all these ideas to figure out how do we actually bring more kids. And the only thing I would debate you on is, for me, it's not about, do you have an opportunity to compete with the Chicago Fire? I want to make it about the kids. I want to make it about the families, and I want to make it about opportunity for kids and families to stay in our game. The recent Aspen Institute came out and said we're losing kids. They're bleeding out of our game. That's what we should be thinking about. We should be worried as a membership that the unintended consequence of the way we've built the system, evolved the system, is that kids are dropping out of it. And that's what we should be focusing on.
But I don't want to speak for the gentleman, but he started it off talking about the financial impact and competing financially. Yeah. And when it's a club that doesn't have an affiliation with an MLS team and a club that does have an affiliation, they're going to have an inherent advantage being affiliated with an MLS team. Do you support something like solidarity payments?
Well, I think we got to look at that, and I think that's the one thing is I have not sat with lawyers to be able to understand the issues of labor law so that we can look at it, but I will absolutely look at solidarity and training compensation. You know, I did have a conversation with folks at MLS who said, you know, they're not going to bring it up. It's not in their best interest to do that, but they'll follow whatever the federation decides. And I think that hasn't been addressed. Once the decision was made, it sort of sat on the shelf. I think we should look at it again. I think 100% we need to figure out if there's a way for us to drive more value back into the game. And so I haven't had a chance to do that. I think we should, absolutely. Now, how it affects our country is different than the reason it was started, which was for the South American organizations that had no money. And these kids and I think we're in a slightly different situation, so we've got to figure it out and how it works best for us. But that's certainly an option.
Speaking of hot button topics and stuff like that, promotion relegation, are you in favor of it? That's a big question. Everybody can say they're in favor of. More importantly, is it something that you see happening?
Well, I think first of all, pro-rel, I like it as a fan. I mean, it's fun and everything else. But you know, what I haven't heard anybody talk about in pro-rel is that the San Francisco Deltas won the NASL crown and went out of business the next day. So I got to tell you, I want to work with all our professional leagues to make sure that we have sustainability. And I actually think we're still in that place. Number two, we haven't seen that pro-rel actually does drive development. I mean, I wouldn't say that the English national team benefits by promotion and relegation.
But people would say that San Francisco, had they won and been promoted into MLS, that they wouldn't have gone out of business because... Well,
but that shouldn't be, winning is not a strategy in my world. Your business should be your strategy and how you manage that, whether you win or lose, because they would have gone out of business had they, no matter what. But the point that I'm making is, I like pro-rel as a fan. It's not where we are today. We should be focusing on our game. By the way, I don't think there's anything that would suggest, I haven't seen anything, and I'm more than willing for us to look at it as it relates to whether or not it actually does drive development. But we've had $5 billion of investment into our infrastructure of our sport in terms of bricks and mortar, training facilities, and all of what's happened around our country. What I want is for that to continue, and I want that to get bigger. Today, it is. And so unless we are absolutely convinced that that doesn't get muted, why would we even discuss that today?
You got time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
One more question out there? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Gary Hopkins. I've been involved in soccer for like 25, maybe 30 years.
All right, well, don't brag. I mean, you're okay.
Too long in terms of other business side of the market. But equally, I was in Trinidad the first time round when we beat Trinidad and went to a World Cup. That's what Mitchell is. I think when two of us in this room. We're sitting at this argument today. It's a great argument to have and the right argument to have, in my view, because we are victims of success, which is great. When we beat Trinidad in 1990, no one really sort of really cared. There was no colour balloon. We went on to go in the league. We did well, but we qualified. There wasn't any noise, there wasn't any news, nothing. We lose to Trinidad this time round, and the world's on fire in soccer. Not just here, around the world, which is a phenomenal thing to be able to say about the sport in this country and how it's grown. So we're beating ourselves up currently right across this country on what's wrong with our sport. And I want to ask Kathy, there's a lot of great things happening with our sport of soccer.
100%.
What's the one thing you think we've done brilliantly over the past, it's a long stint, 25 years? What's the biggest failure? And going forward, what are the two things that you would do to build on and correct that we've done? Because we are in a self-flagellation mode currently. It annoys me a little bit, but we do have to have this discussion. Because the the next level US soccer needs to go to is the next level.
Yeah.
We've got to this level now. But I think, so you could go to that, and I've got a second question if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. So let me say first and foremost, I think that where we are today is exponentially different to where we were. I'm incredibly optimistic by the conversation and the dialogue that I've had over the last 45 days. There's a willingness, but I think the fractionalization in our youth soccer landscape has led to a challenge for kids to understand how to come through the system. Our greatest success is we've grown the game. I mean, we've already talked about it, thousands and thousands and thousands of people that earn a living in our sport. And that didn't exist 20 years ago. So we're still trying to find our way a little bit. But I would call this a period of maturation. We're at an inflection point. It's up to us to decide what do we do next. And what I would say is that's what this election is all about. It's about what do we do next. And I feel incredibly optimistic that we are going to have hard dialogue and conversation around what do we do to make it easier and better for our kids to go through the system. I think we will talk about, is the DA right or is the DA wrong? I think we're going to engage in that in a way that's going to drive change. But I think we've got to make sure that we elect a leader that has the experience to make that change become a reality.
That's one more question.
Yep.
I think it's a question that we're sort of missing a little bit. Outside of politics, and I don't care about any politics in this room, we are bidding for a World Cup.
Yeah.
And in my mind, irrespective of Kathy, anyone who becomes president of the World Cup, the most important thing that can happen to soccer in this country is that we win the bid for the 2026 World Cup. They're the first time, and it changes the landscape from an economic standpoint, a playing standpoint, a second standpoint in the world. We've got a great reputation around the world in soccer over the past 25 years, being a fighting young country, coming to the game, etc. But I have to say, and I do travel the world a fair bit, there's a big perception outside that things are going to look haywire inside of America, whatever your politics. One, do you think that's going to impact our bid? And two, what would you do as our president of US Soccer in FIFA and around the world to let folks know this is the greatest place in the world for the World Cup to come to?
Well, I think that process has begun. And I think that in combination with our friends in Canada and Mexico, the work to speak to the voters, and again, it's a very different voting process. It'll be done by the entire membership of FIFA as opposed to just the executive committee, which now the FIFA Council. So a lot of work is being done to make sure that we can articulate that vision. I actually think it's part of what was smart in the way we came together with our friends from the North and our friends from the South, because ultimately it gives us the ability to have a broader conversation. So I think that's helpful. Ultimately, though, even though we may be in a period where the rest of the world doesn't love all of the conversation, they still love our country. And I'd say that it still will be the greatest place to host an event of this magnitude. But it's incumbent upon us to get out there and make sure we do all the work to have all the right conversations and that they feel comfortable that they'll be welcome here. And I think that's a part of it, and that they'll be welcome in Mexico and they'll be welcome in Canada. And I think that they will be, and I think we'll prove that. And I think we'll win the right to host 2026, and then it'll be incumbent upon us to put on the world's greatest event, or as I like to say, the most important and biggest event on the planet.
But whatever our chances were a year ago, do we have greater chance or lesser chance now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, with our global football community, I think that the world is always a little bit opaque, and so it's incumbent upon us to continue to work very, very hard, which I believe that the bid committee is doing that. So I think that there have always been those, as evidenced by what happened in 2022 or the bid for 2022. So I think we can never be too confident, and I think that's a part of what we have to continue to do as we go out and speak to the global community. So I think our chances are our chances are our chances. It doesn't matter. We are where we are. So whether they were better a year ago or they're worse today or better today, doesn't change that we got to get out and talk to a lot of voters.
You think you're going to win?
I'm certainly running so that I win. And I am hopeful that I'm standing here on February 10th or in Orlando, and that I can get to work on behalf of the membership.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up here.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Not to speak for Kathy, but I'm sure she'll hang around and answer any questions
That's right.
with everybody.